If you're one of the 3 regular viewers, you'll know this channel is sort of rather devoted to messing around with vintage Aeroncas in a Jack Parham style, much like in the book. And one of the things in the book that always intrigued me was the self-expressing statoscope that he mentioned. It's on page 57 if you have the book. The plans I showed at the beginning of the film, but the blue bit of paper is in French anyway, so no one can understand that. And the other bit is out of Jack's diary, which was a rather large book that he noted absolutely everything in. It's a really good read. But the statoscope is a sort of variometer or vertical speed indicator, and it uses a pipette inside a test tube to blow bubbles of water basically, or a column of water up and down, depending on whether you're climbing or descending. The reason he fitted it, of course, if we go back to when I did that flight test of these instruments a couple of months ago, these are all non-sensitive altimeters. So 1,000 feet is barely half an inch, and even on this one, the only one that actually worked, it's probably only 5/8 of an inch between 0 and 1,000 feet, and that one didn't work at all. I found this one the other day. I think it's an altimeter, but it's Spanish. It measures things in pies, which I'm rather excited about. We'll try that at some point. Anyway, about 10 years ago, I was living in Abu Dhabi, and I came across some bits in a science shop. They do have a bit of science in the Middle East, mostly other things, but occasionally a bit of science. And I was able to buy a test tube and a pipette, and I spent a very jolly afternoon in my workshop in Abu Dhabi, sort of messing around, cutting down the test tube and drilling the cork and sticking the pipette in the top, thinking I'd fit it to the Aeronca. And I must have brought it home and lost it. Anyway, I didn't do anything other than think, oh, I wonder where it is. And about 2 weeks ago, I was having a bit of a dig around a box of Aeronca spares, and there was the Yoo-hoo packet that I'd stuck it in, wrapped up in paper, was my self-expressing statoscope. So it's rather high time it was actually put to some use. I suppose a diagram is in order. No, Mr. Gresham, it's not what you think. Maybe it's better that way up. That is a test tube. And inside our test tube we have our pipette, like so. And then in the test tube we have a certain amount of liquid. Enough that the end of the pipette is inside. Now, this bit of the test tube here, this end of the pipette rather, is attached with a rubber pipe to a sealed container. Now, Jack used a flask for his. I'll use something else. Basically, as the aeroplane climbs, the flask or container is sealed. Of course, it has air at a certain pressure, and as the aeroplane climbs, it climbs into less dense air, and so the air inside the chamber wants to come this way, and it will come out of the end of the pipette and make bubbles in the water. So that's what happens when the aircraft is climbing. Let's have a bit of a tidy up, and then we'll work out what it's doing when it's descending. Well, let's not worry. Let's find a rag. There we go. When the airplane is descending, of course, descending into denser air, and the air in the chamber that the pipette is attached to is less dense, and so of course more is going to rush into the pipette, and it's going to tend to take the water up the pipette like so. But of course, if the end of the pipette is only a little way under the end of the water, when the water level drops to there, no more can go up the pipette, so it'll just keep trying to push whatever is sort of in the pipette in blobs, if you like, up. But it won't go very far up the pipe towards the sealed chamber. And of course, when the aircraft is in level flight, there should be an equilibrium, and nothing should be moving, even though actually you might get the odd blob of liquid in the pipette. Anyway, that's what's meant to happen. Of course, it's more interesting in terms of climbing than descending, and that one wants to see, particularly if one's trying to do some soaring like Jack did, sort of regular bubbles coming out of the end of the pipette and sort of bobbling up through the water. But that's the theory behind the self-expressing statoscope. The statoscope, as made by me, is pretty close to Jack's. It's actually a plastic test tube, which is probably a good thing in a cockpit. The cork, I drilled the cork, and it's actually got a slot in it, just there, because obviously we don't want the cork to actually seal the test tube. We want the air to be able to go in and out of the test tube. Otherwise we won't be able to register the static air pressure. So the last thing to do is actually to warm up a bit of this plastic pipe. I could chew it or stick it in a cup of tea or something, and wiggle it over the end of the test tube, and of course that's, sorry, over the end of the pipette. The pipette's got a bit of a raised edge there where the bulb was I removed, and that completes the statoscope. It's sort of ready to fit to the aeroplane. So the next thing is to find something suitable for the chamber. I don't quite have anything as exotic as a large flask for 2 shillings and sixpence, or half a crown in proper money, but I do have this, which is the plastic bottle from my £4.99 meal deal from Heathrow Central bus station the other day. So that will suffice nicely. I've epoxied a piece of brake pipe in the top, which will work a treat, and the hose can push onto it, and had a great length of rubber tube, or well, plastic tube, down at the wonderful Trago Mills the other day. I don't know whether you know Trago Mills. If you live in the West Country you will. It's a cross between a department store and a sort of care in the community project. I'm not sure whether the care is for the people who work there or us, the people who go there. Anyway, it's absolutely splendid. I might pull its leg, but only in affectionate jest, because it's a super place. I also got some eyelets. I thought these might be useful for training the pipe to go in the right direction. I can tweak them with a pair of pliers in the vise if necessary. So I think with that, and with the statoscope made, probably got enough stuff to go to the airfield. Before we head off, I've just had an almighty brainwave. I don't know where these come from, because I'm usually thinking about absolute nonsense. But I was wondering how easy it would be to see the liquid in the statoscope. And I suddenly thought, well, why not put something white behind it? So I was thinking about a piece of paper. And then, of course, I thought, well, I've got an obsession with collecting key cards from hotels all around the world for the use of making scrapers and things for stirring epoxy and all the rest of it. And if I put a piece of plastic behind that on the panel, and I just drill through the plastic sort of 4 times, and maybe I was going to put an eyelet in the panel anyway to hold the bottom of the tube up, like it can go through the card as well, then I'll be able to see the liquid, and we'll be able to see it as we have the camera set up inside the aeroplane, you know, frothing hither and thither as Jack said it would. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Actually, I've got to laugh. This is from the Intercontinental Mark Hopkins San Francisco, which is a very old hotel on top of a very tall hill on the top of a fault line in California, and you sort of lay in bed on the 15th floor and hope the person in charge of earthquakes isn't going to start rumbling it, because, well, I don't know what you can do. Wear a parachute? Anyway, it amuses me no end. The statoscope is now fitted. I didn't film fitting it because it's not very big in this cockpit anyway, but messing around with the camera in it is just silly. So I just drilled the panel carefully. There's an eyelet at the bottom holding the test tube from dropping, although the locking wire that's through the panel is actually holding it fairly firmly. I put some food colouring in the water. That was another mod, which I think makes it really nice and clear. It was meant to be red, and not quite the Bolshevik colour I was after. Not that I'm one of those. And there's the chamber up there. It's held in with a couple of tie wraps. It can't actually go very far at all. It's good for about 30 G. I'll black out before the tie wraps give way. And there's the pipe coming down through an eyelet, so it stays out the way of everything important. So it's time to start it up and see if it works. I think it'll work very well. got back to the airstrip in time. It's beginning to drizzle now, with the weather moving in from the southwest. I was going to head down further west this afternoon, but I binned that just for a bit of a mess around in the local area. Anyway, the Statoscope. Well, I'm very pleased with it. It did as described by Jack in the book, and as it weighs but a few ounces and harmlessly bubbles away upwards or downwards, then I think it can stay. I can't say I'm going to look at it. Everyone really has to sort of look out the window far more these days than in Jack's day. But of course, with his non-sensitive altimeter, I think his statoscope was probably quite a useful piece of kit, and it kept him amused as it has done me this afternoon. I'm sure I'll come up with some more nonsense soon. In the meantime, thanks for watching.